The notice looked ridiculous until the fines started stacking like bricks on my chest. A violation for too many black cars. Not loud music, not weeds, not oil stains. Car color. I stood in my driveway, staring at the letterhead, while a familiar figure paced the sidewalk with a clipboard, counting my vehicles at dusk as if she were tallying threats. That was the night I aimed every camera I owned outward. Doorbell, dash, the small one tucked above the garage. I didn't know yet how deep it went. I didn't know it would end with a news van idling in our cul-de-sac and Karen leaving for good. I bought the house for its quiet curve of street and the way evenings felt like a held breath. I'm Kevin, the guy on the block who works long hours in a garage that smells like citrus cleaner and fresh rubber. Cars are my craft and my therapy. Two of mine are black, polished until they mirror the clouds. Friends swing by. Clients sometimes pick up after hours. It was a steady rhythm. Nobody complained. Then came the new president of our HOA, Karen, with yardstick rules and a smile that never touched her eyes. She measured grass heights and left pastel reminders about trash cans. Annoying, but survivable. The first letter felt different. It cited an aesthetic standard I had never heard of, framed like a safety issue, and warned of escalating penalties. It argued that a cluster of black cars could make the block look unwelcoming. It didn't even attempt to cite a page number. I pulled the covenants and read them end to end. No mention of car color. No limit on driveway count beyond what the city allowed. No rule I was violating. I appealed and got a polite denial addressed from Karen's personal email, not the HOA manager's. The denial carried a cold certainty, like a decision already made. I started noticing patterns I hadn't before. Certain homes never seemed to get warnings. Others received notices like clockwork after particular visitors came through. It was vague, slippery, hard to pin down, and it felt wrong in that way your skin knows a storm is coming before the sky darkens. So I started paying attention and recording. The first clip I saved was harmless on its face. Karen strolling by at twilight, pausing at the edge of my lawn, counting under her breath while her pen tapped paper. Later that week, she circled back at 5:30 a.m., phone out, photographing tailpipes and plates. Meanwhile, across the street, a row of white SUVs spilled over the curb and blocked sightlines at the corner. No letters appeared on their doors. I checked the community portal. No violations recorded. I'm methodical by nature. I made a spreadsheet. Dates, times, car colors, whether a letter followed. I dug through our state's HOA laws and learned homeowners are entitled to certain records. I requested violation logs. It took 2 requests and a certified letter, but the manager finally sent them. That's when the underside showed itself. Names repeated. Addresses repeated. The reasons were hazy, folded into phrases about uniform appearance and community comfort. The pattern wasn't about noise or safety. It was about presentation. That word, uniform, kept flashing in my mind like a warning light. And the entries grew sharper when the cars clustered were dark. It wasn't just me. 2 streets over, another driveway had been cited for a similar reason, with a bizarre note appended about the block's welcoming image. I went to the next HOA meeting. The room was a library of folded arms. Karen sat at the center with her stack of binders. She pushed a new policy draft about limiting the number of dark-colored vehicles per home, couched in landscaping-friendly language. There was talk about property values, nostalgia for how the neighborhood used to look, smiles that curdled quickly when people asked for specifics. When a homeowner mentioned uneven enforcement, the atmosphere tightened. Karen shut down comment time early on a technicality. Back home, I strung the footage into a timeline. Karen's repeated late-night counts, her lens angling only when the cars were black, her casual stroll past crowded curbs of lighter cars. I overlaid the violation dates. I added a shot of the letter demanding payment for a 3rd offense under a rule that didn't exist. I stopped sleeping well. It got worse. One morning, a tow truck idled at my curb before sunrise. The driver shrugged at my cameras as if he were invisible to them, a glossy paper in his hand signed by the HOA president, authorizing a tow for a violation never discussed at a hearing. I blocked the driveway with my body and my truck. He left, grumbling to nobody. Neighbors peeked through blinds. The air tasted different after that, metallic like a bitten lip. Clients started texting to reschedule, uneasy about the sudden attention on my driveway. The fines crept toward 4 digits. A final notice threatened a lien. The word dug its nails into my day until everything I did bled a little. There are rules that keep peace and rules that push people into silence. I realized which kind we had. I filed a formal complaint with the state's Consumer Protection Office. I also opened a tip form I'd sworn I'd never touch, the one for our local station's investigative team. I attached the files that told the story better than my words could. The notices, the logs, the timeline, the quiet turns of a camera that kept coming back to the same color. The email from the producer was short, just a request for a call and permission to use certain clips. By then, my driveway had become a case study. A week later, a van with a satellite dish appeared at the mouth of our street, unhurried, like an animal that knows it's at the top of the food chain. They didn't need me on camera. The footage and the documents were the heart of it. The segment aired on a Wednesday evening, sandwiched between weather and sports. It was a clean, surgical dissection, the unreasonable notices, the non-existent rules cited in official letters, the disproportionate focus on dark-colored vehicles, the video of Karen counting only those, the attempted tow before dawn, the board's meeting minutes pushing an aesthetic policy that didn't pass legal muster. A civil rights attorney explained, in measured terms, how selective enforcement dressed up as aesthetics can cross bright legal lines. An HOA governance expert called it a classic misuse of power. Within hours, the clip bounced through group chats and neighborhood forums. Screens lit up across living rooms on our block. The next board meeting overflowed into the hallway. People who had smiled politely at Karen now looked at her the way you look at a loaded trap in the grass. She tried to hold the center with printed talking points about community cohesion, but the room didn't give it back. A homeowner from 3 streets over recounted fines that followed certain visitors to her home, noting the coincidence of timing and the color of the vehicles involved. Another read from the logs I had obtained, highlighting how complaints were dropped when the cars weren't dark. Insurance counsel warned of exposure if the pattern continued. The property manager's eyes flicked between the room and his exit plan. Karen's cheeks flushed a brittle pink, and for the first time since this began, she seemed small. The board moved for an independent audit of enforcement actions, a reversal of the violations in question, and a halt to any towing authority pending legal review. The news ran a follow-up. The segment ended with footage of a moving van backing into Karen's driveway. Boxes went in quickly, like items swept from a table after a meal. She left before the weekend. The cul-de-sac was strangely quiet, the way a house feels after guests go home, and you realize one of them took the tension with them. The fines vanished with a single emailed notice from the manager, unceremonious, like a bad line item knocked from a receipt. The lien threat evaporated with it. The board convened a special session to rewrite policy around enforcement transparency. Every citation now requires a documented rule reference, photographic evidence, and a cross-check for uniform application across the neighborhood. An ombudsperson rotates each quarter to review patterns. Appeals go to a third-party mediator. Small things, but they matter. Neighbors who had kept their heads down started sharing stories. Some were minor, potted plants nudged behind fences, trash reminders delivered with a tone. Some had more sting, especially when they lined up against the darker paint on someone's driveway. In the retelling, people found a brittle thread of similarity running through different homes. When the thread was pulled, the fabric moved. I went back to work without flinching at car colors. Clients returned with sheepish apologies they didn't need to make. The garage smelled like citrus again. The cameras stayed up, not as weapons, but as witnesses that help memory do its job. A local nonprofit offered a workshop to the board on equity and bias in community standards. Attendance was required, a quiet acknowledgement that rules are never neutral in the hands of people who aren't aware of their grip. I still have the timeline on my hard drive. Sometimes I open it to remind myself how slowly a wrong can rise, how carefully it can dress itself as order, and how quickly sunlight can make it retreat. Karen became a cautionary tale on neighborhood forums, a name people use when they talk about power without humility. Kevin, for better or worse, became the guy who pressed record. If there's a lesson, it isn't that cameras fix everything or that news segments solve power. It's that patterns tell the truth when individual moments try to lie. It's that a rule book can be a ladder or a cudgel, depending on who holds it. It's that silence is the strongest ally of small injustices that hope to grow. So here's the question I keep asking myself, and maybe you will too. When the language gets coded and the lines get blurry, will you look away or will you notice, gather the pattern, and press record before the story writes itself without you?